reelected and being sworn in on January 20th. The New York Times has done an analysis which suggests that's the case, that there is no path to victory. What are his lawyers advising him? My advice is you can do great things in the next 9 or so weeks of your presidency, even if you no longer contest the outcome of the election. Maybe that would be the way to turn a loss into a win. You'll hear more about this on The Dersh Show. Is today, Friday the 13th, for President Trump's chances of actually turning around the election results and being inaugurated on January 20th? Should his lawyers finally have that come to Trump moment and sit down with him and say, look, we've gone through all the states, we've gone through all the likely scenarios, and we've come to the conclusion that you have no path to victory. The New York Times did an analysis yesterday in which they came to the conclusion. Their title is, Can Trump Still Win? No, he's already lost. They've come to the conclusion, quoting lots of election experts, that even if he wins all of the cases that are now pending in the various courts, there just aren't enough votes that are being reasonably contested to turn around enough states to give him the 270 electoral votes. Now, of course, he doesn't need 260 electoral votes to win the presidency. The reason for that is that Joe Biden needs 270 electoral votes to win the presidency. If President Trump got no votes at all, or 1 electoral vote, or 10, but Vice President Biden got only 269 votes, not the 270, Trump would become the president of the United States. That's by dint of a strange provision in the Constitution that says that if no candidate wins the 270, they don't mention the term 270, but wins a majority, now we know that a majority with current populations is 270. If no candidate reaches a majority, that is, if Biden can't get beyond 269, then the matter goes to the House of Representatives, where each state gets 1 vote, and there are more Republican state delegations in the House than Democrat, and so Trump may very well become the president. But even that scenario now seems, if not impossible, extraordinarily difficult. This is the way the New York Times concluded its analysis. Even this theory relies on a series of 1 in 100 legal bank shots, all being successful in multiple states simultaneously. Now, President Trump has made quite a few bank shots. Winning the 2016 election took a lot of unlikely bank shots with the buzzer about to go off. But this time, the odds are so overwhelmingly against him. He will win in Pennsylvania the lawsuit challenging the votes that were received after Election Day was over, even though they were submitted before Election Day was over. Should he win that? Shouldn't he win that? That's not my issue today. The issue is what he will do. And if that case were to get to the Supreme Court, I think he would win that 5-4 based on the Bush versus Gore precedent, the current lineup of Supreme Court justices. The problem for him is that even if he wins those thousands of votes, we don't know exactly how many there are, it seems that they're considerably less in number than the margin of victory that Biden had over him. So it would be a Pyrrhic victory. The same is true in the other states. Yesterday, Arizona declared that Biden was the winner by 11,000 or so votes. You know, those are numbers that are rarely, if ever, turned around in recounts. The same is true in Georgia, where there will be a manual recount. And in other states where his lawyers are perfectly entitled to challenge and bring recounts. Again, I'm praising his lawyers, not condemning them for exhausting every conceivable legal and political remedy. You just don't give up the presidency of the United States to be polite. You give it up only if you think you have no possible path to victory. Now, lawyers serve several functions. They advocate, and they're doing their job, advocating. They're in court in Pennsylvania. They're in court in a number of other states. Lawyers play another role as well. I know because I've played that role over and over again. We advise our clients, and it's the hardest sit down you have with a client. I do it in the context of criminal cases. I have to sit down with clients occasionally and say to them, look, we have a really good case here. We have strong arguments. We have good evidence. But I have to tell you, the odds on you winning are very, very slight. Let me tell you a story that happened to me about, must be more than 10 years ago. A very prominent doctor was accused of Medicaid, Medicare fraud. He came to see me and he said he was offered a deal by the prosecution. He could get a suspended sentence, not go to jail, lose his medical license for 5 years and have to pay fines if he pleaded guilty. But if he contested the case and pleaded not guilty, the guidelines for sentencing were about 11 years. And they would recommend 11 years, and the judge would probably impose 11 years. So he had a choice. He believed he was totally innocent, and he had a good argument that he was totally innocent. But the risks of losing were 11 years in prison. But if he bit his lip and pleaded guilty, he would get no prison time, and perhaps he could get back to practicing medicine in about 5 years. He asked me to do a careful legal analysis of the evidence, and I did it. And I gave him my conclusion, and my conclusion was he had about a 40% chance of winning the case. And the guy said, great, 40% chance, that's a lot. Most criminal defendants only have a 5 or 10% chance of winning their case. And I said, it's not enough. It's not enough. 40, 60 is not enough to risk 11 years in prison versus no time in prison. So I recommend that you plead guilty. He rejected my advice. He went to trial. He put up a very good defense, but he lost. And he got an 11-year sentence in prison. I was not his lawyer at trial because once he rejected my advice, I didn't want to be part of his case. But that's the kind of conversations lawyers have to have with clients. Now, in that case, in criminal cases, you get something back from pleading guilty, for conceding something that you don't believe happened, for saying you're guilty even though you believe you're innocent, even though you think that the prosecution against you is corrupt. You get something back. You get years. The problem with the advice that a lawyer might give President Trump is he gets nothing in return if he were to concede that Vice President Biden is now the official president-elect of the United States. What does he get in return? Well, let me make a couple of suggestions about what he might get in return. He would be able to devote his full attention in the next 2 months and slightly more to doing really good and important things. He could go back to trying to get more countries in the Gulf region and in the Middle East to normalize relations with Israel. He's done a fantastic job along those lines already, getting the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, the Sudan to normalize relationships with Israel, getting Lebanon, Saudi Arabia to even talk about normalizing relationships with Israel. That is a Nobel Peace Prize accomplishment. Indeed, I believe the Nobel Peace Prize, the event that warrants the Nobel Peace Prize this coming year, must be the peace process in the Middle East, the progress that Israel and the Gulf states have made toward normalization. That's the event that deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Prize criteria say you have to look at who and which groups have done more to promote peace and disarmament in the world. Well, that event certainly is the number one event, and I think qualifies for the Nobel Peace Prize. So the only issue that's left is if the event qualifies for the Nobel Peace Prize, which individuals should get it? And to me, there are two contending groups. both of which include President Trump. One would be the various heads of state, President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the emirs of the countries that normalized relationship. That would be a normal way of doling out the Nobel Peace Prize. That's what happened with the Oslo Accords and others, where Yasser Arafat got the Nobel Peace Prize along with Israelis, and when Jimmy Carter, who has not been a force for peace generally, but a cause of even greater tensions in the Middle East for his support for Arafat, he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm not suggesting here that the Nobel Committee would actually give a peace prize to Donald Trump, but he and his group of people, Jared Kushner and David Friedman, the ambassador, and Avi Berkowitz, worked so hard to achieve the goals of bringing about a peace, Secretary Pompeo, all. So that would be another possibility. And so putting aside his personal ambitions and his personal pride that he would get in winning the Nobel Peace Prize, the accomplishment would be recognized as a signature part of his presidency. And he could do that, and he could improve and increase the effectiveness of the role he's played in peace in the Middle East. That would be a legacy that any president would be proud of. The other thing he could do is he could understand and act on the fact that pardons and commutations are an important part of our system of checks and balances. They're not just gifts given to friends and acquaintances and even people who deserve it. It's part of our system of checks and balances. The Constitution accords the executive branch, the President of the United States, the power to tell the legislative and judicial branches, you've gone too far. You've produced injustices. Pardons and commutations are there to correct injustices that are not capable of being corrected by the judicial process or the legislative process, or have not been corrected by the judicial and legislative process. And I know President Trump is interested in the pardon and commutation power, and he could use the next 2 months to give a large number of pardons and commutations to people who deserve it and people who have been treated unjustly by our legal system, by laws, draconian laws, which punish relatively minor violations with long prison terms, life imprisonment. The idea of the trial penalty that I just discussed. If you plead guilty, you get a small penalty, but if you plead not guilty, you get an enormous penalty. That's penalizing people for exercising their constitutional right to go to trial. He can help cure that problem by giving pardons to people who have been victims of the trial penalty. So there's so much he could do, and he doesn't have to essentially concede defeat. All he has to do is say, look, I'm told by my advisors that this election cannot be turned around by legal or political actions, recounts, or cases. I still think it was an unfair election. If he wants to say it was a stolen election, that's his prerogative. If he wants to talk about massive fraud, that's his prerogative. The evidence at the moment doesn't support that. Maybe there'll be some evidence coming out. He doesn't have to backtrack from those statements. All he has to do is say, look, there's no realistic chance that I'm going to win this, so I want to congratulate Vice President Biden for being elected, for being president-elect. I want to help in the transition. I want to do whatever I can. And he might want to even announce that he's going to run against in 2024, that he's going to run again, and he's going to run against then President Biden. That's what Andrew Jackson did in 1824, 200 years ago, when he felt the election had been stolen from him by the corrupt bargain between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. He used that as a wedge issue in his campaign to win election in 1848, and he won overwhelmingly. So the president has that option. He can congratulate Biden, say, I have no chance of winning this election, but I want to win the next election. and I'm going to keep complaining about the processes, and I'm going to try to change the law, make it harder to do write-in ballots, any of those things he has the right to do. We have the right to oppose it if we think that's wrong. I think write-in ballots, if properly conducted, help democracy, don't hurt democracy. But I'm laying out the options the president has, and one of the options he has now is to no longer contest this election. Doesn't have to admit he was wrong. He doesn't have to say that there was no corruption, that there was no fraud. All he has to do is say, I'm no longer going to take my next 2 months, etc., toward contesting the election. I am not contesting the election. I'm going to turn my attention to the Middle East, to the pardon process, to issues growing out of China, to other issues that develop in the world. He can say, I'm going to be a great president for the next 9 or so weeks, and then there'll be another president, and we'll watch him. We'll be the loyal opposition, and we'll run against him if you want to do that. Those are all available options. The only option that doesn't seem today available to him with any prospect of winning is to continue to challenge the election results. If the New York Times is correct, and it's often not correct, but if it's correct in its analysis, and it goes through the numbers in each state, the numbers of ballots separating winner from loser, the number of challenged ballots, the likelihood of wholesale success, such as might very well occur in Pennsylvania, retail success, particular ballots thrown out in Georgia or in Nevada or in Arizona, those don't add up to the likelihood that this election will be turned around and that President Trump's fortunes will be reversed. So he has some hard decisions to make. I'm glad I'm not the lawyer who has to sit down with him and tell him the bad news. But there are lawyers, and there are White House staff people, and there are family members, and there are close friends, and there are associates with whom he has a long-term relationship, who can sit down and tell him the truth. And the truth is that absent extraordinary combination of events, that bank shot, series of bank shots in so many states, Joe Biden will be sworn in on January 20th, and that you have so much time left between now and January 20th to do so much good for the American people, to do so much good for the world, that you should spend that time productively. Be a winner. You can be a winner if you spend the next weeks doing great things. And if you continue to contest the election and lose in the end, isn't it better off being a winner? And that's the message I would give him. He hasn't asked. That's the message I'm sure he's getting from some of his lawyers. Again, let me say, the job of a lawyer is twofold: to advocate like hell, to fight like anything you can, to win, but at the same time, to give an honest assessment to your client as to what the benefits and costs are of going forward. I've done that for 55 years. It's been very, very painful. It's like the doctor who reads the MRI and the CAT scan and has to come in and say to the patient, look, I'll try as hard as I can to get this tumor out safely, but I have to tell you, the chances of you surviving are very slight. Doctors owe their patients an obligation of honesty. Lawyers owe their clients an obligation of honesty. The media owes its readers an obligation of honesty.